Hello and welcome to the Moonshots podcast. It's episode 155. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons. And as always, I'm joined by the life hacker himself, Mr. Mark Pearson Freeland. Good morning, Mark.
Hey, good morning, Mike. I can't possibly take any level of credit, though, with regards to life hacking as today's focus and topic with Mr. Tim Ferris. I mean, Tim Ferris is the man who I think we could probably give him the title of an individual who's really life hacked his way throughout his entire career.
He has. It seems like everything is up for reconsideration. Everything is there to be hacked, tested, experimented upon, including himself. Tim Ferris is just so moonshotty in that he will challenge assumptions and the status quo, and he'll come up with different ways to hack around any sort of optimization of oneself. He's totally moonshots, isn't he, Mark?
He really, really is. And today's show, 155, Mike, we're digging into Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek, which again was a hugely popular one, not only for you and I as we consider the way that we work, both together as well as privately throughout our week, but also amongst our listeners. Fair to say it's a pretty popular book for readers and listeners around the world, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you're thinking about being the best version of yourself, if you're trying to do something remarkable, then you might call upon remarkably different ways of getting it done. And there's no one else that does it better than Tim Ferriss. He came hot onto the scene with 4-Hour Workweek, which we're going to study today. And he's just gone on to write many other successful books. He has a very successful podcast as well, YouTube channel. He is a sort of the ultimate sort of media magnate of 2021, isn't he, Mark?
Yeah, he's really carved out a specific space in the industry, I believe, where he's focused on learning from individuals. So he speaks to these titans of industries. He gets their tips and recommendations, and he puts them into practice. Okay, so what worked for so-and-so? Right, I'm going to try it for 5 weeks. Let's see whether all the fuss is worth it or not. So he's kind of like a human guinea pig for us, isn't he? He'll go through and test some practical advice and methods in order to try and be the best version of himself. And it's great for us and our listeners to be able to study Tim Ferriss and the work that he does in order to see what sticks and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think that on a broad level, we can take from Tim's work in the 4-Hour Workweek that this was his very radical approach to rethinking how we work, which is something a lot of us spend a great deal of our lives doing. And it is so worth returning to for some of the practical techniques that he talks about. He gives us lots of ways to, create experiments, to hack away at different parts of your life to get better outcomes, challenging some assumptions. But I think more broadly, what is so special about this book and why it's still so important is that it's a sort of an awakening, this book. It's like, hang on, everybody does a 40-hour work week. And Tim's like, no, it can be 4 hours. And so in doing that, it's like a mental workout. It's like you can rethink things. Don't take things for granted. Don't just accept the common assumptions around you, but rather you can challenge the world that you exist in, and you can get these sort of outperformance results by just thinking differently. So he's almost got that little bit of Steve Jobs, that sort of think different vibe, which is very cool and very moonshots. Mark, I can't think of many authors that I could say are more moonshotty than Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, Tim Ferriss really does go out and do what a lot of us only dream of doing. And by him writing these books, doing his podcasts, his YouTube, he's able to, bring us those secrets and bring them into practical pieces of information that you and I and our listeners can kind of consume and pick up some piece of advice and then go out and put into action. So he's a real moonshotter for all of us. He's the one who breaks things down into really, really simple to replicate processes.
Absolutely. So with that all being said, I think it's time to test and learn. So let's jump into the world of Tim Ferriss and the 4-Hour Workweek.
I think there's a lot to learn from this first clip, Mike, of Tim Ferriss reflecting back, looking back at his career, back at when he was in college. And one of the first and I'd say most important lessons that any of us can learn. So no better intro in my mind is hearing from Tim himself and how we can condition ourselves for failure.
So my story starts with an audiobook. It was my first product. I was convinced, this was in college, that it would be my ticket to millions of dollars and changing the world. And it was designed for guidance counselors in high school who wanted to help students get into their first choice colleges. Spent ages putting this thing together, spent all of my money buying up inventory, an initial run of about 400 copies, and it sold a grand total of 1 copy to my mother. Not a one was legitimately sold. And it's because I wasn't thinking as my market, I was thinking of my market. In other words, I wasn't writing for a target market that I belonged to, and that was a mistake. So I learned 2 things from that. Number 1, think as your market, not of your market. And number 2 is that you should design your product after you know what your market is, okay? So you find your market and then design a product for them. And that's what I did with the 4-Hour Workweek. And even though it was turned down by 26 out of 27 publishers before it was sold, I was confident because I tested it. And I had done it very cheaply. So on Google AdWords, for example, I tested the title, The 4-Hour Workweek, with about a dozen others. And this is how it worked. I bid on terms such as retirement, world travel, content related to the content in the book, and then when people search that on Google, on the right-hand side with the sponsored results, you would see ads that had the headlines, the prospective headlines as the ad titles, and then the prospective subtitles as the ad text, and it led to an empty page, under construction page, but Google mixed and matched the titles and the subtitles, so for less than $200, I could see which combination of title and subtitle had the highest click-through rate. And the 4-Hour Workweek, as much of a blessing and a curse as it is, ended up being the title that won, as did the subtitle that we used. So what I learned is, through that and through all of my experiences up to this point, is that you need to fail and learn how to fail, condition yourself to fail, but in very small, reversible ways. And I think that what a friend of mine, Joe Sugarman, said, he's one of the highest paid copywriters on the planet, and that is, for every problem, the problem itself presents an opportunity that dwarfs the problem. And that is to say that if I had only looked at my failure with the audiobook and viewed it as a failure in the product, let's say, and not in the process, I wouldn't have taken away much. Instead, I realized that my approach wasn't right, fixed my approach, and that has led to a lot of great successes.
Ooh, so good, Mark. It is so good to hear people talking frankly about failure. I mean, failure is something that we are always so reluctant to admit to, let alone talk about. I find it, just off the bat, how good is that? He's like, I literally printed 400 books, and apart from the one my mum bought, not a single one was sold. It reminds me so much of Eric Ries admitting when he created Lean Startup as an idea and as a book. He spent 4 years building a product that nobody wanted. So he spent his career now helping others avoid that same problem. Don't you find it when we listen to Tim Ferriss and hear him say, wow, I really failed, but I was capable of evaluating and changing the approach, not just saying, okay, it was a dud, but the fact that he said, okay, so I changed my approach and then success came. But it started with conditioning himself and admitting to himself that he failed. And then he's kind of learnt to take much more discrete, smaller, reversible risks. But it all started with, what a flop. Yeah. I love that, don't you?
Yeah, I really do. And just to build on that, it's almost, once you admit that the difficulty, the desirable difficulty, as some of our
Right.
recent moonshotters would describe it as, once you admit or are open to the fact that a desirable difficulty and a challenge is an opportunity to learn, and actually, as Tim's copywriter friend calls it, an opportunity that dwarfs the problem, only then can you have that confidence or maybe that clarity to look back and see them as small moments that you can learn from. And I love this idea of fail in reversible ways. Fail often, fail quickly, learn from them, test and learn, and go out and do it better. You know, as a perfect career lesson for Tim to have gone through it at an early age and then realized it's so valuable. And it's still something that we can all learn from as we get older and through our careers. The idea that if it doesn't work, hey, that's cool. Put your hands up and you can learn from it. Just see it as an opportunity rather than a disappointment, perhaps. It's
yes.
so
Or what he said, Mark, is don't just walk away from it and say, well, that was a crap book. I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah.
He did the reverse. He said, I'm going to do it again, but I'm just going to change how I go at it. And so there's this little tip he's giving us, like take much smaller, discrete experiments and tests, so you don't go through this entire linear process and have a big failure at the end. Like test and learn through the journey and you'll get there.
And it can be, the test and learn piece can be cheap and easy. You know, the technique that he's describing, even though it might sound difficult to some of us, actually, I think it's pretty straightforward, you know, doing it under $200. And what was the output? One of the most well-known and popular podcasters, as well as, you know, entrepreneurs and authors.
A best-selling book.
I mean, right?
number one on the New York Times bestseller, right? Boom.
It's undeniable. All for a quick test and learn process that maybe took him a weekend, a couple $100. I mean, talk about value.
Exactly. Because he had that emergent discovery, that curiosity, taking these small experiments after he admitted he had failed, but then reevaluated the process. And I think this really sets up the show ahead of us today. I think what we see is Tim's thinking is confronting us with, are we doing things in the right way? How are we going about the things we do? So ahead of us on this show, we've got all sorts of goodies. We've got some thoughts around making priorities, how to think, use, and protect yourself from information, how to think about your time and evaluate it and where you spend it, and identifying the things that mean the most, and that all kind of comes together with some thinking around, big picture-wise, the real need that we still have, even though this book is over 10 years old, we still have this fundamental requirement to kind of reset how we spend our time. And that's all ahead of us, Mark. We've got a bevy of clips. It's actually a really nice step change from, say, Gladwell and Adam Grant and some of the other authors, isn't it?
It really is. And look, I loved the Gladwell series, and I'm a big fan of Adam Grant, all the series and the books that we covered. But actually, yeah, I'm pretty excited to dig into Tim Ferriss. I think as an observation, it's quite practical. You know, we learned a lot from Malcolm Gladwell as well as Adam Grant, and there's a lot of data, which I know you and we love to get into, and we love to pull apart and see the insights that they're both saying. When you think about the Tim series, I think we're going to learn a lot of practical elements, practical tips. I think that's where Tim Ferriss really comes into his own.
Yes. Now, before we get into a bevy of Tim Ferriss clips and really unlocking all the insights that are in the 4-Hour Workweek, Mark, I want to ask you one thing. If our listeners are spending their time on one action, we have one small ask of them as they're listening right now. What is that one ask that we would love them to do to help spread the word about our show and how to share this thinking out loud and this learning out loud? What's the one thing we ask of them?
We'd love you, listeners, just to pop into your podcasting app of choice and leave us a quick review. Like Mike's saying, we love it hearing from our listeners, seeing our show that we love doing and we love sharing with all of our listeners every week. We like seeing it appearing in charts around the world. And it's all down to you, dear listeners. And it's all down to the way that you're sharing it, the way that you're reviewing it and rating it. That's how we get into different markets and see ourselves spiking with new listeners. And the idea of getting our show into the ears and onto the speakers of listeners around the world gives us such joy and inspiration. So our one request to you all listening, leave us a rating and review and help spread the word.
Yeah. So right now, just while we get this next clip ready to go, just jump into your podcasting app. And I mean, at worst, at least just give us a rating, whatever it is. Consider leaving us your thoughts and reviews. What's been fantastic is over the last week, folks in Slovakia and Bulgaria have given us ratings and reviews. And so we're seeing a huge growth in listeners there. And not to forget that we have listeners all around the world. Germany, France, Sweden, Spain, Brazil, Russia, Norway, Ireland. This is so cool that we can all learn out loud together. And we ask only one thing of you. We'll put in the work. We'll make the show. If you get out there, leave those ratings and reviews so we can share this work with more people who are on a mission to be the best version of themselves that they can be. And I think one of the first things that Tim Ferriss can help us with is if we want to be the best version of ourselves, it's all about making good decisions and how to eliminate the things that don't matter and focus on the things that do. So let's have a listen to Tim Ferriss talking about Pareto's law.
Here are a few simple steps you can take to escape the rat race entirely, not just win it. One of the first steps is the process of elimination. So to start, you need to consider something called Pareto's law, more commonly known as the 80-20 principle. Because in order to work less and not have everything fall apart, you'll have to quantify the 20% of activities that are producing 80% of your desired outcomes. Also, take that time to determine the 20% of activities and people who are consuming 80% of your time. Use this principle for everything: customers, work tasks, but also for personal chores, even for friends. The goal here is twofold. Number one, to find your inefficiencies in order to eliminate them. And then secondly, and this is just as important, to find your strengths and those critical few tasks so you can multiply your output. Working every hour, every minute from 9 to 5 with some type of fidget isn't the goal. It's simply the structure most people use. It's actually a legacy from a time that has already been obsolesced. In a knowledge economy, the more important thing is to shift from presence to performance, cut out the static, all the things that consume time and income without contributing back, and focus on the critical few. You'll find that very few things matter.
The critical few, where only a few things matter. I mean, that's pretty confrontational. As a man myself who kind of sees any work stream that's coming across my desk or anything that I interact with during the day, I feel like it's almost a new priority. It's a new distraction, perhaps, as Tim Ferriss would call it. And this 80-20 rule that we can dig into, I feel it's so valuable. Find those inefficiencies, find your strengths, and make that balance. Multiply. In order to multiply your output, if you can find those, identify them, and spend your time in the right way, manage your time in a better way, as Tim's telling us, it's going to be so much more valuable, so much more honest with you and your priorities, right?
You know, so when I think about Pareto's law, what I want to do, Mark, is I actually want to get you to share with us what your 80-20 really is. So if I ask you, what's the 20% of the things that you do that create 80% of the value, right?
Oh.
Do you, I know it's tricky, right? It's really hard. And I think this is such a good exercise. What are a couple of things you think you do in your work that create the most value?
I think the value that I can bring is when I think connecting people. I think trying to communicate or align channels of communication between different parties and trying to get us to the next stage. I think if I boil down the best moments where I'm adding value to a project, it is that communication piece. It's probably on the phone, maybe it's face to face, maybe it's interpreting what somebody wants and trying to turn it into an action. I think it comes down to, for me, I think, communication. But actually, the conversely, the 80%, the rest of my time, I think gets kind of wasted. It's a lot of emails. It's a lot of back and forth. It's a lot of lack of clarity, isn't it?
Yeah. So let's keep the experiment going. So we know that you're the super connector. What's the one thing that you do that doesn't create much value that you want to? And this is crucial to what we're learning from Tim Ferriss and 4-Hour Workweek, is what should you eliminate?
Oh, that's a hard one. It's a hard one. Right. And I have been thinking about it. And to be totally honest, I'm not sure whether I have the answer yet. I think
that's okay.
I think one of the initial responses that I had after digging into the clips this week was, emails. We all are overburdened with emails, aren't we? And I wonder how much of a blocker that is to actually being more efficient with one's time. But again, here's the challenge. Here's the, I suppose, the desirable difficulty that we've got to figure out. How do you eliminate something like emails in a world that, is connected via instant messaging?
I know.
We have partners all across the world. We have businesses and relationships on pretty much every time zone that we know. So you can't necessarily eliminate it. It's trying to find the way. Maybe it's the manner in which I interact with emails. Maybe there's the lesson.
Okay, so that's great. So you're essentially saying what you want to eliminate is the not urgent and not important email, and that's a job to do. But there you go. We've already got our first gift from Tim Ferriss, which is forcing us to use Pareto's law and ask ourselves, what's the thing that we do that creates the most value? And what's the thing that we do that doesn't create that value? Because you want to try and eliminate this. Now, I want to suggest to you a follow-up tool, which is really powerful when we think about how we spend our time. It's called the Eisenhower Matrix. And what it says is the way you choose on what you want to work on right now, in the here and now, is you say, what is important and what is urgent? And that's what you do right now. Now, this Eisenhower Matrix then says, if it's important but not urgent, you should immediately plan the time in your diary to do it. Now, we're going to put a link in the show notes to the Eisenhower Matrix because it's really powerful. Now, if it is a non-urgent thing, you should obviously, if it's a not important thing, you should obviously delegate it to someone else who's better doing it. If it's neither urgent and not important, you just shouldn't do it at all. So this is the 4 quadrants of the Eisenhower Matrix. It's so very powerful because we are often taking urgent things and dropping the important things, which is another way of saying there are opportunities for us to create enormous value, but we allow all of these day-to-day distractions getting in between and we never really get to it. Because I think that's what we're talking about here, isn't it, Mike? There's so many things preventing us getting to the work we really want to do.
Yeah, well, exactly. Nowadays, everything feels like a priority. Everything that comes over your desk is a matter of, we better sort this out straight away. But actually, the truth is, again, I love the Eisenhower Matrix. We've mentioned it on the show before, actually. And it's a perfect tool to analyze the importance of something. Is it a priority?
That's right.
Do I need to schedule it, or
Yeah.
can I reduce it? And I think that's a wonderful way of approaching that.
It is. It really, really is. So there you got it. We've already got like a huge disruptive thought in our mind, which is to use Pareto's law to eliminate the things that don't create value and focus ourselves in the highest order of things. Where is our unique ability? Where is the thing we were born to do? Spend more time doing that and less time doing things that are neither important or urgent. Thank you, Mr. Ferris. And the good news for all of us is we've got plenty more ideas, disruptions for us. Where do we want to go now, Mark? We're digesting Pareto's law, but what should we follow it up with?
I think building on the Eisenhower Matrix and thinking about how much information comes across us, this next clip or this next, tip really from Tim Ferris is all about information and the value of letting things wait.
Another critical step and a real complement to elimination is what I call the low information diet, or cultivating selective ignorance. Keeping abreast of all the new developments in any field will consume all of your time. It'll be all input and no output. You can't possibly digest all that information. So a more effective approach is to try to catch up when need be, as opposed to keeping up at all times. A big part of selective ignorance is learning to let things wait. For example, email. So email is the single largest acceptable interruption in modern life. And it's a very convenient way of simulating forward motion without accomplishing anything. It shouldn't be a workspace, it's a tool. And one of the easiest methods I've seen for controlling email, and one that's become quite popular in Silicon Valley, is setting up a simple autoresponder, much like a vacation autoresponse, that says something like the following. Dear all, in an effort to actually get work done, I'm testing a new email policy. I'm checking and responding to email only twice a day at 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. Pacific time, or whatever your time zone happens to be. If you need a response before one of these two times for anything urgent, please call me on my cell phone. Thanks for understanding this move to greater effectiveness and efficiency, whatever your name is. This gives you the breathing room, finally, to single task and focus on completing the mission-critical tasks, the critical few, from start to finish without interruption.
Ooh, what a call. What a siren to taking control of how you work. I think what you were mentioning, Mark, with Pareto's law is exactly what Tim addresses here. We've let email take over the show, and it's time to take back the reins. We got to step in there and say, whoa. Let's have a batch process for email. Let's take control. Email is not going to dictate what is our priority. It shall be us. And Mark, if I zoom out of this, I think what he's really saying is, don't let all of these modern tools and technology become the work, because just in the same way people think being outraged on social media is them making a contribution. No, you got to actually do something if you want to change the world. And I think it's the same here in a personal lens. If you want to realize your dreams, hopes, and aspirations, you got to take control of the situation. And that starts with batching your email, structuring your day, structuring your time, and focusing on the things you were born to do rather than just tit for tat email ping pong. This speaks to me so much. I mean, I can't tell you, Mark, the attention I put into, and I don't get it right all the time, but just batching email. One batch in the morning, one batch in the middle of the day, and then one big batch before I wrap up for the day. I think there's a real learning here, which is we can make the mistake of thinking because we're on the mail and we're responding and pushing things around, they're actually being productive. But the reading and sending of email is not actually work itself, but we think it is, right?
100%. This speaks to me so much, this tip and this lesson that Tim's suggesting that we learn from. And it reminds me of blocking time, blocking time in your day to really focus on some deep work. And Mike, as you know, I'm a big fan of blocking out my calendar, focusing on one thing at a time. And this lesson from Tim Ferriss speaks to me so much. Not only block your time to work on projects and so on, block time to do your emails, get them out of the way, close down that tab, close down that software, and then get into the work. Because you're right, it isn't doing the work when you're replying to emails. Exactly as Tim's calling out, it's just a tool. It's a tool that enables us to get from point A to point B, but actually the juicy details and the real creativity and innovation gets done outside of them. So this for me is one big green tick. This is something I'm going to start doing.
Yeah. Let things wait. You set the priorities, because anyone in a modern job is going to be so slacked, text messaged, iMessaged, emailed, you name it. There's just going to be a bombardment of notifications, emails. The only sensible way to respond is filter, take control. And I think this is a real challenge to us when we think about where we're spending our attention and how we're managing our workflow. But Tim's not quite finished yet in challenging some of our working assumptions on how we spend our time and where we put our attention. This next clip that we've got is really thinking and evaluating the things you do through a lens of time. And what he goes on to challenge us to do is to start outsourcing.
The third important tool I'd like to mention, and one of my personal favorites, is Outsourcing Life. To get started, though, we first need to replace the very obsolete concept of annual income, which is a very deceptive metric, with hourly income. And people are generally extremely hesitant to delegate or outsource because they feel they can do something free themselves. This is very inaccurate. So let's start with a very basic calculation of hourly time. If you make, let's say, $50,000 per year, you cut off the last 3 zeros, that leaves you 50, and you divide that in half and you get 25. So you make $25 an hour. This is assuming you get 2 weeks off per year and you're working 40 hours per week. So let's just say on the very high end that you can hire a personal assistant at $30 per hour to handle one workday of 8 hours. So your cost per hour is then $5. So his or her 30 minus your 25. That means $40 for a full 8-hour day of freedom. So this also means that you can take a 3-day weekend every week and it will cost you $40 per week. I hire virtual assistants around the world, which only takes a few hours to help me with just about everything, from business research to reading email, cutting hundreds of email down to 4 or 5 that I actually have to deal with, to travel, product development, purchasing, planning parties, even online dating. There are a lot of unorthodox and creative uses. Personal outsourcing is only limited by your imagination, and the return on investment is astounding, 400, 500%, even for someone who makes $30,000, $40,000 a year.
Well, it's again such a great practical tip from Tim Ferriss here. The idea of outsourcing your life, delegating it, finding virtual assistants to weigh in and manage. Maybe it's your diary, your emails, production, whatever it might be. I think it's such a bit of a confrontational or challenging tip from Tim Ferriss that I think would undeniably have a positive impact. I think it would be so valuable to do. But it's a bit of a challenge, right, Mike?
Well, it is. And it's a beautiful follow-on from the Eisenhower Matrix, because part of this Eisenhower Matrix is delegation, right? Or as Tim would call it, outsource it. And I think that I tell you this, there's this thought that came to my mind as we're listening to him. And it's like this. I want to look at the symptom that I think most of us can relate to, which is, oh my gosh, I have so much work to do, right?
Yeah.
And do you have this feeling?
Yeah. Oh yeah, regularly. And you know, I have to catch myself because I think I know where you're going.
And then you're like, you're making all these trade-offs of, okay, well, I'm going to finish the week. What is like the minimum I can get done and survive for the next week, right? That's how it feels for a lot of us. And, there are ebbs and flows, but I think you could characterize the life of the modern knowledge worker is that we're doing so much more. We're so much more productive than other generations. That we get so many messages that we're just trying to keep our head above water, right?
Sure. Yep.
So what happens is we start doing this thing where we work incredible hours, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you're like just kind of falling over the finish line on Friday. Maybe we've even got this terrible habit that work is now getting into Saturday and Sunday too. But we're getting into this bit where there's just so much to do and there's not enough time, right? Now, the first thing that Tim is asking us to do is eliminate the things that are not important, not urgent. Focus on the information and the attention that really matters. And then he brings us back now in this clip and he's saying, okay, well, there are things that you can delegate, that you can outsource. And here's where I think we really get to the essence of what we can take from Tim Ferriss. And I want to come back to this story I was telling, like, okay, you've worked so hard Monday through Friday. You feel like you're just keeping your head above water. You don't feel like you're leading the way. You're just keeping up. Is that a feeling you think you could characterize for yourself, Mark, and that many of our listeners could relate to?
I think that's probably a feeling that myself, as well as probably many others, can believe. Yep, have experienced.
And it's crazy, right? Because you're sitting there going, I've worked like crazy. I've worked maybe 10, 11, 12-hour days back to back to back, and I'm just managing to keep up. I mean, that's just exhausting when you think about it, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's exhausting. And, I think as an observation, it's probably one of those things that our listeners, if they've experienced it before, you naturally ask yourself the question, is it worth it?
Right. And then because the thing is, you work like crazy and you're like, you've just kind of fallen over the finish line. You're like, oh, well, that didn't feel great. So I think it's at this point that Tim turns up and says, well, hang on a second. You should be spending your time on the things that matter, filtering and so forth. But what he's also doing is find the things that might be, say, not urgent, but important. And ask yourself, can I train somebody else to do it for me? And this is where things change, doesn't it, Mark? This is the moment where you're like, oh, hang on.
Yeah, I mean, basically what he's kind of saying is, wouldn't it be great if you had a double of yourself? Imagine having two people doing the work. What could you do? One of you could focus on priority. The other one could focus on the things that you delegated, as per the Eisenhower Matrix.
Yes.
And he's calling it out as quite a practical thing that we can go and do, which I think actually it is.
And here's where I think what we all suffer from. We say, oh, I've got two choices. Either I can do it now and get it done quickly, or I can invest more time to brief and delegate properly, keyword, properly to someone, so that in the long term, it's much more efficient. And I think the mistake we all make, or we tend to make most of the time, is we go, I'll just do it because it's quicker, which is great in the short term, terrible, absolutely terrible in the long term, isn't it?
Oh, and look, I am definitely one of those people whose natural reaction is, I'll just do it. Give me the keyboard or give me the mouse. I'll go and do this. I'll pick up the phone. But You're right. If you brief somebody properly, and again, let's really focus on that word, spend the time and actually brief them properly, it will alleviate things in the long run. And if anything, it'll make you more efficient and probably mean that the work you're doing is better because of it.
Absolutely. Now, here's the thing. Let's just do the math here. If you invest in spending a couple of hours to train someone to pick up a task that maybe takes only 30 minutes, in the short term, the task only takes 30 minutes, but you spend 4 sets of 30 minutes, i.e. 2 hours, to brief them properly, to document it, to take them through it, to check in and make sure they understand it. It only takes 4 instances of that task to occur, and you've actually already squared away and got your return on investment on your time spent. And then after that, when they successfully do the task for you, it's all profit after that because they're doing it now, not you.
All profit. You're already seeing yourself with more time on your hands.
Right. So it's a question of asking yourself, what's like a repetitive, non-urgent task that I can delegate to somebody, and over time, for the medium and long term, enjoy the return because it's freeing up my time. Because imagine if you said, to your case, Mark, you could spend an hour less a day on email. Here's where we find our motivation. I want you to imagine what you could be doing with that time.
Ooh, imagine that.
Right?
I could be encouraging our Moonshot listeners to leave ratings and reviews.
amongst other things. But the point here is what Tim says is like, at what point are you going to take the time to outsource or to delegate? And I think if we just were to think about, if I wasn't doing that, what could I be doing of higher value? I think this is where I found the motivation to do it. So the blocker is taking the time to brief properly. Here is my golden tip that I try to embody is that, and you've seen me do this at work, Mark, when I want to delegate an activity or a task, particularly if it's technology based, do you know what I do? I make a video where I record my screen and I give a voiceover to the thing that I'm doing. And then I send the person that I'm delegating to a full brief and description of the recurring task. Plus I give them video that they can constantly come back to. And this was my huge breakthrough is we often, we will sit on the phone and tell someone a thing, but then it's like, there's a lot of information being shared and you can't return to the conversation. So I found providing a video walkthrough of a screen capture or something similar to this, so they have an asset they can replay to themselves 2 or 3 times, is an invaluable way of delegating, because so much of what we do is probably a browser-based task that you can just record what you're doing in the browser with a voiceover and they can continually come back. It's not like if they didn't take the note in the chat, then the information is lost. They can just return to the video and play it a couple of times. And I think this is a huge accelerator to outsourcing and delegating. What do you think?
I 100% agree. I think having the asset that you can refer back to actually, again, saves you time. You won't have to reiterate or revisit any of those initial delegation moments because you spend the time initially to create an asset that can be reviewed on YouTube or on an email, in a movie attachment, whatever it might be. I think that's a real aha moment, creating that screen capture, because you're right, it saves a lot of time for the individual who's picking up the work as well, because they can refer back to it at any time.
Right. Now here's the thing. Why does taking either a voice memo or a video screen grab, why does this work so well? It's because when you're delegating, you're essentially taking one task that you have learnt and you're giving it to someone else who needs to learn it. Now, how do we learn? We learn through the doing. So just because you get on a call and you tell someone, this is what I want you to do, they'll take notes, but it's not until they attempt to do it themselves that they'll start to incur barriers or things they don't understand, or how does this work? If you've provided the video, rather than them ringing you up a couple of days later and saying, I'm sorry, I don't understand, or doing the task incorrectly, they can refer back to the video as they are trying to actually do the task. So they can learn through the doing. And I think this is really profound. I think too often we think one call, that's it. People have got it. They're off and racing. But that's not the fact. People learn through doing. So give them an asset that they can refer to, and they go, oh, okay, I'll go back to the 12 minutes and 30 seconds in the video where he's doing this complex thing on the screen. And then you can slow it down and pause it and go, okay, I'm going to try that. I mean, Mark, have you ever had this thing where you're doing a YouTube how-to video and you pause it, try and do what they do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. It's all the time. It's so valuable. You know, it guarantees, it gives you the confidence that you're doing it correctly.
Exactly. So that's why how-to videos are so popular on YouTube. So I guess what I'm really saying to wrap this up is make your own how-to video for whatever task you're outsourcing or delegating in your life, be it professional or personal. Give all of the context in a captured asset so people can keep coming back to it as they're trying to learn it from you. I think this is such a good way to make outsourcing and delegation easier, to make it quicker, more efficient.
A fantastic build on, I think, Tim Ferriss's key lessons there. Great.
Learning out loud. That's what it's all about, Mark. Now, just to kind of recap, we've got, 3 big thoughts that he's given us about, eliminating things that don't matter, filtering on information and putting your attention towards the things that do, outsourcing and delegating things to others that makes sense. I think this is a great platform. And I think what it does now is it kind of forces us to ask this big question about, then where do we spend our time? Now, before we play that clip, I think we should encourage our listeners, Mark, don't you, to go spend their time at a certain destination.
There's a certain very popular destination online that you can all go and visit, our dear listeners, moonshots.io. On this site, you'll find all of our latest episodes. Once Tim Ferris 4-Hour Workweek goes live, that's 95 shows, all available not only in your podcasting app of choice, but moonshots.io online. You can also find our show notes and transcripts for all of the shows, including the Eisenhower Matrix, as well as Reed Hastings' culture deck. You'll even find a lot of mantras that we've been inspired by from our innovators and some of the key lessons that they've taught us. You can also sign up for our newsletter to be notified when the latest episode goes live, and also follow our blog too. So moonshots.io is where all of our information is really housed. So go and check it out and let us know what you think.
And just as a bit of a tease, we have our 100th centenary show coming up. On moonshots.io, we have published our favorite innovators that we're going to study together. So I encourage all of you to go to moonshots.io and you'll see what's in store for our very special 100th show. But we're now coming back to Tim Ferriss and the 4-Hour Workweek. We're thinking about where to spend our time. And the great news for us is that Tim Ferriss has some great advice on how to spend time on the things that are most profitable.
Just reiterate then what the premise of the book is.
So the premise of the book, I would say there are 2 premises. The first is that the objective is not busyness. So massive action without clearly defined objectives is a form of laziness. Right? And secondly, that the deferred life plan, so to speak, that is a retirement-based life plan, long-haul career planning, after which you redeem all of the experiences you want to have, the possessions you want to own, is fundamentally flawed. And I don't think it's very difficult for people to argue with the logic. It's easy to attack me. Okay, he's 30 years old, doesn't have any kids, what does this guy know?
We're accused of being too nice to our guests, so Robert and I have decided we are going to attack you.
Yeah, attack me.
But then we read about the kickboxing stuff.
Right. So
we let the chat room do it.
Yeah, you let the chat room do it. And that's fine. I mean, if people want to attack me, if we all had the same opinion, the world would be a very boring place. But let's just take personal outsourcing as an example. I can't do it. I have a boss. I'd get fired. Okay. First of all, I don't distinguish between work or business and personal time, in so much as if you're misspending that time, whether it's on household chores on the weekend when you've put in 80 hours from Monday to Friday, or checking email to simulate forward motion as opposed to defining your measurable objectives, those are both wastes of time. So if you have a job and there's absolutely no way you can apply outsourcing that job, which we can question in a second, that still means, let's say your son has a birthday party on Sunday, he wants the equivalent of this season's Tickle Me Elmo, which is impossible to find. Rather than spending your entire Saturday going from store to store over, let's say, a period of 5 hours to find the toy, you could call or email Ask Sunday, go to asksunday.com, and for $40 to $50 a month, have 30 inquiries. This would be one. You call them, you say, here's my zip code, call every toy store within a 10-mile radius, find this toy, make a reservation, or purchase it using my credit card, and have it held behind the counter. Call me when it's ready, tell me where to pick it up. And that would save you 4 to 5 hours, right? So let's just say that you make $50,000 a year. There are a number of ways you can go about it, but an easy way to approximate your per hour income is if you work 40 hours a week and get 2 weeks of vacation a year, is to cut off the last 3 zeros and chop that remaining number in half. So that would mean that if you make $50,000 a year, you make roughly $25 an hour. Okay, so if you can, for $40, get, let's say, 30 inquiries, this one inquiry alone on a weekend saves you 4 to 5 hours. Well, that's, let's say, $100 to $125 profit in time currency that you've gained. And the goal is not, again, to get from 80 to 4 hours. I don't believe and never claim that someone can do that overnight. And most people, if they enjoy their work, would never want to get to 4 hours. So the objective is to spend time on the things that are most profitable or most enjoyable. And for some people, let's say those are pastors, writers, teachers, it's not being inactive. That's never the objective. I work my ass off on things that I care about. I'm a very, very busy guy, as you know, but on things that I choose to spend my time on. Those people, let's say a pastor who suffers from let's say emotional fatigue, sympathy fatigue, his objective will simply be to reduce the volume of work so that he can be most effective. And whether it's using Ask Sunday or simply training yourself to check email at set times so that it doesn't become a reactive, disorganized approach.
It's a good summarization clip there. It's going over a lot of the key lessons that we've learned, and most importantly, it's Tim calling out that it doesn't necessarily happen overnight. He's not necessarily saying you want to get down to 4 hour week because you want to clock off and go to the pub or go and play sport all the time. Instead, it's reduce the amount of time that you're being inefficient and ineffective with, and instead reappropriate or prioritize it into something that's either more enjoyable or more important. And for me, one of the key clips or key moments in the clip is right actually at the very beginning where Tim's calling out massive action without objective is a form of laziness. And, if we dig into that for a second, it's the idea that everything can change. You can change the way that you react to being overwhelmed with emails. I'm calling myself out here. I'm being lazy at not reappropriating the way that I interact with emails.
Yes.
I'm doing the same thing day in, day out, but I'm complaining about it perhaps, or I'm calling it out on Moonshot's podcast. But actually, I'm being lazy. What I should be doing is, as Tim Ferris is calling out here, test and learn. Test with a couple of different maybe softwares or a couple of different time blocking mechanics and get better at it. And that's, I think, the real key thing that Tim's calling out in that clip. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And I would say that there was one word that he used in that clip that I think really is the shift. And that word is choice. He's saying it is your choice to spend your time where you believe it is most effective, as opposed to what many of us struggle with, which is spending our time with things that we don't choose to spend our time and effort with. So he is forcing us he is confronting us and saying, well, there's only one person that can solve this situation, and it's yourself. So you must take the steps. Number one, do the 80-20 rule. Number two, process your information, and not everything is both important and urgent. And wherever you can, outsource and delegate so you can spend more time on the things that are profitable or that bring you joy. That is what he is saying. It is a choice. We are not victims. It's a choice. And I think this is a very, once you process this, you're like, damn it, right. I'm batching my email as of now.
Yeah, it is. I mean, again, it's Tim Ferriss's book is part inspiration and part practical tips, isn't it?
It is.
You know,
it is.
He's calling out these truths and then saying, well, here's a quick idea. Why don't you go and do this? Yeah, perfect. Batching email. I love that. I'm going to give that a go.
Yep. He's just making us aware we've all got some bad habits, and thank goodness he's not only giving us tools to kind of fix that, but I think he's giving us inspiration. And I want to play this last clip now, which helps us really put this piece of work, the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, it helps us put it in context. So for the last time on this show, let's take a listen to Tim Ferriss talking about unplugging and resetting.
The 4-hour workweek is possible, but you need to completely unplug and reset. And the reason that's necessary is because there's an epidemic, and I do mean epidemic in this country, of information abuse and information addiction, where people have come to believe that checking email 200 times per day, having a BlackBerry to your head or in your hand while you're at dinner or on the subway or in your car or with your friends is the path to becoming more productive and more successful.
You mean it isn't?
It isn't, because giving everyone around you, every person in the world, immediate access to you is inviting interruption and inviting minutia to completely invade your life, which is happening to everyone.
Did it happen to you?
It did happen to me. I had no intention of writing this book, but from 2000 to 2004, I was working at startups in Silicon Valley. I started my own. I was CEO, and I worked from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. I checked Outlook, hitting send receive 100 to 200 times per day, like a rat with a cocaine pellet dispenser. Slept under my cubicle, sent emails on Thanksgiving to prospects. It was a depressing scene, and it's a very, unfortunately, common scene. And I think everyone is at a point of overwhelm. There is more information than we can possibly organize. Time management is dead.
How do you turn that around?
The way you turn it around is you have to completely unplug and reset. That means that you need to take a step back, forget about what people expect you to do, forget about what's popular, and really look at what works and what is consuming your time. So there are 4 steps. There's definition, elimination, automation, and liberation. Definition is simple. First, you need to define your ideal lifestyle. What do you want to be doing from when you wake up to when you go to sleep? And so what do you want to have? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? And how much does that ideal lifestyle cost? And that becomes your target. Elimination is simple. It's getting rid of everything, all the static, all the noise, all the interruptions, all the micromanaging, all the people possible that interfere with getting you to that ideal lifestyle. The third, automation, is about taking the few remaining tasks that are important but time-consuming and either delegating, automating, or somehow outsourcing them. So in my particular case, I have an army of MBAs in India, about 25 of them who work for $4 an hour and take care of tasks that would otherwise consume hundreds of my hours. And then the last step, liberation, is about the final ingredient in lifestyle design, which is mobility, and then also how to use the time once you create it, which is very difficult for most people.
Okay, this is fascinating, but that's the point. It is difficult. I mean, how do you put the BlackBerry down? Aren't you worried that you're not going to make as much money, that you're going to lose clients? Do you have statistics that show that that's not the case?
I have statistics that would absolutely make your head spin. So if you're interrupted by email and phone, there was an experiment done at King's College, for example, that showed that people who were stoned scored 6 points better on an IQ test than people who were interrupted by email and phone.
Wow.
And that
Good to know.
Good to know. 26% of people in the American workforce are on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The system is not working. So it's not a question of if I should do this. It's a question of when. It is the only real alternative. So one simple step that people can take, a baby step to prove the concept, is to simply use an autoresponder. Set up an autoresponder that tells everyone who emails you, I will be checking email twice a day.
That's a great idea.
At 11 and 4 p.m. If you require a more urgent response before one of those two times, call me on my cell phone.
Okay, if I start losing customers, I'm going to call you, Tim.
You can call me.
Okay.
What's going to happen, instead of losing customers, is you'll get more done in the next 48 hours than you would in the next 2 weeks.
I mean, talk about a way to bring the show all around. The 4 key lessons that we've covered, Mike, throughout the 4-hour work week today, in today's episode 95, it's exactly what we've been talking about. You got to define the inefficiencies, identify what the priorities should be, eliminate those that you can do without, outsource or delegate where possible, and then you'll be liberated. You'll be able to start using that time more efficiently and using it in a way that ultimately is better value for not only you, but if you think about it, for those around you too, whether it's family, friends, or your work. And it was a good wake up moment for me, especially in that last clip, this information pandemic or information abuse, I think he calls it. It's exactly how I feel. There's so much with emails and contacting. So just time blocking or block emailing, and therefore keeping your plate clean and able to deep dive into other work. It's such an easy, I think, a potentially easy maybe, way to move on from today onwards.
Yeah, and I think what we really hope in learning out loud together with all of our listeners is, I think we've really tried to share with everyone that we and everyone is suffering from this same overload of information, right? But here's the thing. If we use some of the methods that Tim is talking about, if we focus on what our natural abilities make us best at, if we take control of the inbox, these are all ways in which we can have choices about how we spend our time. And that directly relates to us fulfilling our potential, because it's the things we work on. Those are the things that shall become true. And if we don't spend our time doing what we were born to do, if we're otherwise distracted, then the key thing where it really starts with, it's on us. So if we accept that it's our choice to get ourselves out of this, he's presenting to us this roadmap, which starts with unplugging and resetting. And the crazy thing is, he wrote this book 10, 15 years ago, and you listen to it now, and it's like he could have recorded that this morning, couldn't he?
Yeah, it's still so true. It's always
right?
True. And it's still, particularly now when people are working remotely, regularly working from home more frequently, this is a way to save your social versus work life. It seems so black and white, really.
So, yeah, Mark, I get the feeling you might be implementing a little bit of a batching program for the email. Would that be a deduction?
I want to build on Tim Ferriss's test and learn approach and do it myself. I think he's got so many truths here that I'm not only inspired by, but I can actually go and practically put into action. So I think I've learned a lot, Mike, from the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss.
It's good, right? It's really good. Well, I hope that you find all little small discrete tests and experiments you can do with your inbox and many more things. Thanks to Tim Ferriss. Hey, and listen, Mark, thanks to you for sharing with me and all of our listeners. It's been a bit of a ride, the old 4-Hour Workweek, a bit of a bucket of cold water on the face, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great confrontation as well as reminder that we can all choose how we use our time.
Yeah, powerful stuff. Okay, well, Mark, thank you. Thank you to you, and thank you to all of our listeners that seem to be popping up in all sorts of amazing places all around the world. We thank you for your ears, your attention. We thank you for all your support, your reviews and ratings. And we really hope that today we've given you a little bit of a wake-up call on how you spend your time. And we hope that whether it's the 80-20 rule or outsourcing and delegating or using the Eisenhower Matrix, we hope that you have found a way to improve how you spend your time and focus on the things that you were naturally born to do, the things that you find your flow within. And if you need to, you can go and unplug and reset. And there's no better place to do that than here together on the Moonshots podcast. That's a wrap.